the mic here. Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Can we all take our seats, please? We are just about to start. Can we quickly take our seats? Good afternoon once again. My name is Rufel Banda. I'm the Chief Regional Operations Officer at the African Development Bank. And we are here to discuss the issue of Ubuntu Initiative, Ubuntu Leaders Initiative. This is an initiative of South African G20 presidents in developing cross-border infrastructure for regional development. The objective of this seminar is to formally introduce the Ubuntu Initiative on cross-border infrastructure to the G20 members as well as to the wider world. Similarly, the aim of the seminar is to provide a platform for Africa governments, G20 members, MDBs to engage in dialogue, exchange lessons, and build coalitions for effective implementation of cross-border infrastructure projects. Rooted in the Africa philosophy of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, the Ubuntu Initiative aims to assist with the translation of the G20 toolkit for developing cross-border infrastructure projects into a practical Africa framework for action. With those few remarks, allow me to now invite the Director General of the African Development Bank to give us his keynote speech. Director General.
Change and economic volatility. This is why we are moving together the traditional narrative of infrastructure deficits and shortfalls to one of strategic investment to propel exponential growth. Africa's infrastructure isn't a burden to be endured, but a significant investment opportunity to be realized. A signal to African and global investors that Africa is a predictable, reliable, and secure partner for long-term investment and installing confidence in our continent's future. We also recognize that traditional approaches alone cannot bring Africa's infrastructure financing gap. The Ubuntu Initiative advocates for a new wave of financial innovation. At the African Development Bank, we are systematically de-risking projects, making them de-risking projects, making them accessible to non-traditional investors, and building a self-sufficient and resilient financial ecosystem. The message to global financial community, and indeed to also the African financial community, is clear. Africa isn't just ready for investment. We are developing the tailored tools and mechanisms to attract the capital that Africa's transformation requires. I'm sure you'll see that I keep emphasizing that global but also African investors. Because if African investors are not investing, why should foreign and global investors come and invest in Africa? So it is important to also attract the African investors to be champions in this initiative. The Ubuntu Initiative transforms Africa infrastructure into a powerful catalyst for structural transformation, bringing hope and optimism to a brighter future. It will drive Africa's infrastructure industrialization, create millions of decent jobs, empower women and youth, and firmly place Africa at the heart of global value chains. To expand markets under the Continental Free Trade Area, making our aspirations of Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals a tangible reality. By applying the G20 toolkit to cross-border infrastructure within the African context, we are providing global frameworks within a robust foundation in theory and practical application. We cannot achieve prosperity on our own. It is a force we must share collectively, otherwise it will diminish for everyone. Today, Africa is prepared to deliver, it's ready to lead and eager to partner. The African Development Bank, along with the South Africa's National Treasury, is fully committed to supporting you on this journey. We aim to work together to transform infrastructure corridors from vision to reality, from plans to projects, and from commitments to lasting impact. Our role in this initiative is supportive and essential, and we are dedicating to ensuring its successful implementation. This is South Africa's lasting legacy to the G20. It is anchored in the African Development Bank Group. It's Africa's bold promise to the world. Thank you.
With those remarks, you can see that this is a board initiative, like it has been mentioned. It's there to ensure that at least we're able to implement transformative projects, which is very critical. And I think we'll count on all the partners to implement these projects, like it has been mentioned by the DG. With those few remarks, allow me to invite the following to the podium. First, Isham Koka is an infrastructure specialist at the World Bank. Please. Then we have got Murtaza Said, Head of Ecosystem Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Then we have Director Joy Kategekwa, who is the Regional Integration Director at the African Development Bank. And we have Mike Salau, who is the Director of Infrastructure and Urban Development, also at the African Development Bank Group. As you can see, these four panelists will give us a presentation covering the toolkit, the G20 toolkit, high level in terms of summary, and then it will be followed by the Ubuntu Initiative itself, the one we are launching. So with those few remarks, again, allow me to call Murtaza Saidi, Head of Ecosystem of the Asian Infrastructure Bank, to deliver his presentation on cross-border infrastructure lessons from good practices. Murtaza.
Thank you very much, Lefoyu, and a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, it's indeed a great pleasure to be here at the launch of this very important initiative, and I'd like to congratulate both the South African G20 presidency and the AFDB on this very important milestone. At AIIB, connectivity is a very important part of our mandate. By 2030, we want cross-border infrastructure investment projects to make up as much as 25 to 30% of our financing portfolio. And we've already built up a fair bit of experience with such projects over the last 10 years since we were created. As the Director General Kennedy mentioned, these cross-border infrastructure projects are very vital for connectivity. They're important because they enhance regional and global integration, and they also help to improve people's lives by enlarging markets, enhancing opportunities for industrialization, and for mutually beneficial trade. And at the same time, cross-border infrastructure also helps to protect regional public goods like water resources, nature, and the environment. However, because it involves more than one country, infrastructure like electricity lines, joint waterways, railway connections, bridges, roads, and digital connections across national borders is very difficult to plan, coordinate, and finance. And this creates an important role for MDBs like AIIB to help bring countries together. So we're very pleased at the AIIB that over the last 2 years, we have been tasked by the G20 to collaborate with our MDB partners on the topic of cross-border infrastructure. And this is the work that I'd like to introduce to you today. Last year, under the Brazilian presidency, we led a G20 report together with the EBRD and the Inter-American Development Bank. This report proposed a framework that practitioners can use to guide them about what they need to consider when they are thinking of cross-border infrastructure projects. The framework is built on 3 pillars that address the key barriers that such projects face, and I've got them at the bottom of the first slide. On the left-hand side, you can see that the first category of barriers stems from the fact that the costs and benefits of these projects vary across the countries involved, and therefore their incentives for participating are likely to be very diverse. These kinds of barriers are covered under the first pillar of our framework, which deals with the economic rationale and planning of the project. The second category of barriers has to do with the short-term horizon that policymakers typically have due to the electoral cycle, as well as difficulties created by the fact that countries have different levels of capacity and diverse legal and regulatory systems that make it hard to have a harmonized approach. These kinds of barriers are covered under the second pillar of our framework, which deals with political support and governance. And the third category of barriers stems from the fact that countries have different credit ratings, varied levels of financial development, and unequal levels of access to finance from international markets, making it challenging to finance cross border infrastructure projects. These kinds of barriers are covered under the third pillar of our framework, which deals with what you need to do to fund and manage cross border infrastructure projects. So, what we did for the G20 last year was to apply this conceptual framework to real life cross border projects in the energy, transport, and water sectors across the world. The case studies included two from Asia, which are shown in red, the almost 100,000 kilometer long China Lao Railway, and the monsoon cross border wind project between Laos and Vietnam, which is the largest of its kind on the continent. In Central Asia, shown in blue, we looked at the Middle Corridor Transport Project supported by the EBRD. In Europe, shown in green, we studied the Karawanke Tunnel between Austria and Slovenia, which is part of the Trans European Road Network, and the joint border crossing between North Macedonia and Serbia that facilitates freight and passenger transport. In Africa, shown in purple, we looked at the Lesotho Highlands Water Project between South Africa and Lesotho. And in Latin America, on the left hand side, we looked at three cross border projects: CPAC, the Regional Electricity Market, the Capricorn Bioceanic Corridor, and the Paraguay Paraná Waterway. By applying the conceptual framework to these actual case studies, we were allowed to come up with recommendations for what practitioners need to do in order to deliver good cross border infrastructure. And what I'd like to do in the next 5 minutes or so is to just give you a flavor of some of the high level recommendations that came out of our report last year. There are many more in the report, and I would encourage you to have a look at it. I'll have a QR code at the end. But in the interest of time, I will just focus on 9 high level messages. And I'll also say a few words about how I think this can inform the Ubuntu initiative. First, it's really important to connect a cross-border infrastructure project to a broader vision for regional cooperation that results in benefits in terms of reduced transaction costs, technology transfer, and FDI. This was done very well, for example, with the CPAC power grid connection in Central America and the Karawanke motorway tunnel in Europe. At the same time, long-term strategic planning and agreement on project prioritization is also very important in this regard. And I'm very encouraged to see that the Ubuntu initiative has a vision for prioritizing projects across Africa. And I think it's going to be very important. Second, you must have a very good understanding of how the costs and benefits are distributed across the countries involved. For this, you can use modern analytical tools like geospatial analysis, as well as general equilibrium models. And third, it's important to mobilize and empower a cross border team of technical experts to do feasibility studies and financial planning. And you must also make sure that there's a thorough process of consultation with all key stakeholders throughout the planning and implementation of the project. Good examples of this include the Lesotho Highlands Project Water Commission and the stakeholder engagement plan developed for the monsoon wind power project between Lao PDR and Vietnam. Let me now turn to the main high level recommendations for what to do in order to ensure political support and robust governance. Our fourth recommendation is to lock in and sustain political support beyond the current administrations, since the projects will take time and are likely to span more than one political cycle. This can be done by signing a binding cooperation agreement like the Presidential Declaration for the Capricorn Bioceanic Trade Corridor connecting Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Paraguay. In this context, MDBs can also help sustain political support through their backing, as was done by EBRD for the Middle Corridor transport route in Central Asia. Fifth, a cross border institutional arrangement needs to be put in place to account for differences in government capacity and to facilitate decision making. Such an arrangement should be well resourced and have conflict prevention as part of its mandates. And good examples of this are the Joint Construction Committee that was put in place for the Karawanki Tunnel and the Regional Commission for Electricity Connection that was established for CPAC. Sixth, an intergovernmental agreement is also needed to align the diverse policy, legal, and regulatory frameworks across the participating countries. This can range from a simple MOU to a more formal treaty laying down the division of labor, how costs and royalties will be distributed, and how any disputes will be resolved. Good examples here are the MOU signed by China and Laos on railway cooperation and the comprehensive treaty signed for the Highlands Water Project between Lesotho and South Africa. And here, I'm also encouraged to see that the Ubuntu Initiative has a governance concilium, a group of experts that will help unblock institutional bottlenecks as well as harmonize regulations. Finally, what should practitioners do in terms of finance and management? Our seventh recommendation is that public funds will always be needed to bring in private investors, but these funds should be used judiciously and in a way that does not create contingent liabilities. The middle corridor funding raised by individual Central Asian countries is a good example of this. Eighth, MDBs can help by providing their funding as well as guarantees in a way that mitigates risk and thus brings in private capital. This was done by AIB and ADB in the Monsoon Wind Power Project, helping mobilize a syndicated commercial bank loan. And another good example is the concessional financing provided by the World Bank, AFDB, and NDB for the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. And finally, the ninth recommendation is to explore creative ways in which these projects can be made bankable in order to make it worthwhile for private sector investors. This can be done through stable revenue streams from user tariffs and tolls, as well as asset transfers through public private arrangements. Climate finance is another large pool of private money that can be leveraged in the case of cross border projects with climate resilience features. And here too, I am very encouraged to see that the Ubuntu Initiative plans to rely on regional DFIs as well as MDBs to push forward the initiative. So, those were the main messages from the work that we did last year. I'm happy to say that we are continuing our work as part of this year's G20, and we have been tasked by the the South African presidency to work with our World Bank and AFDB partners on how to implement the recommendations from last year's report. And for this, we are developing a practical toolkit, which my colleague Ishan from the World Bank will present next. Let me just end then by again congratulating the South African Treasury and AFDB for launching this impressive initiative. And we at AIB stand ready to support you as you take this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mtazam, for that excellent presentation. And the key to this presentation were the issues of economic governance, planning, the need for political buy-in and support, which are very critical, and also resource mobilization, which also talks to how prudent can we mobilize these resources in moving forward. Those were very key elements in terms of, I think, the way we can move with the practices, the best practices. And I think, again, without taking much of the time, I would like to introduce Isham Koka to present to us the cross-border infrastructure toolkit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ishan. I work as an infrastructure specialist at the World Bank. So just before presenting the toolkit, I wanted to give a brief introduction about the World Bank's engagement in Africa. In the last fiscal year, FY24, the World Bank provided $38 billion of financing to Africa. Sorry, just trying to... in the last fiscal year alone, in FY24, the World Bank provided about $38 billion of financing to Africa. This includes grants loans, equity investments, as well as guarantees. The Regional Integration Program in Africa is the largest in the World Bank, and it helps address diseconomies of scale, promotes trade and diversification of economic and trade objectives. It also addresses global public goods and bads, which are like on the lines of pandemic and food security, and provides effective platforms for promoting regional cooperation. The cross border infrastructure is at the center of the strategy for the World Bank's investment program in sub Saharan Africa. The regional connectivity encompasses of developing transportation corridors, regional power pools, such as the Western, the Eastern, and the Southern Africa power pools, and investment to support developing regional digital markets. A way to look at it is that about $8.5 billion of World Bank's financial commitment is in cross-border infrastructure for sub-Saharan Africa. An example of that is that the program commitment just to the regional power pool development in 18 projects across 27 countries in itself is $4.7 billion. We go beyond infrastructure and also address key reforms to ensure that the investment in infrastructure has key development outcomes such as job creation, such as actual increase in the trade of electricity and lowering the cost of transportation. We also work very closely with the Africa region economic communities through policy dialogue as part of our implementation of the regional integration projects. The rationale for cross-border infrastructure is well known, and Murtaza shared a lot of key points on that. The key message is that although developing cross-border infrastructure project is a complex process, they are often transformational and have the benefits which are not being able to be achieved by a single country approach. The preparation of the cross border infrastructure toolkit hinges on the conceptual framework, which was developed last year under the Brazilian presidency and consists of the three pillars on economic rationale and planning, institutional governance and political support, as well as financing and management. The toolkit, however, takes a step forward. The toolkit encompasses the knowledge and experiences of the three MDBs, the AFDB, AIIB, as well as the World Bank Group, and shares those aspects of case studies as well as specific tools that help define the toolkit in a structure which is able to guide the planning ministries and the private sector stakeholders in development. The toolkit also provides practical guidance on how to implement the three pillars as well as across the project lifecycle approach and has strong links between the cycle as well as the pillars. The toolkit is designed to address specific challenges facing cross-border infrastructure. Some of the challenges have been addressed and shared by Murtaza. I'm going to talk about a few more. Cross-border infrastructure are more complex and take longer to prepare. They, however, should not be the reason for not doing it. The benefits out justify the investment, and a review of our regional integration program in Africa has proven that the national level objectives on development outcomes achieve a higher level when cross-border infrastructure projects are made part of the national planning process. The second challenge is that the amount of investment needed to prepare these projects is large. This is even more important and a matter of concern for the national planning bodies because of the limited fiscal space all of the developing economies have. However, there is a strong understanding that needs to be developed to prioritize cross border infrastructure as part of the national infrastructure plans. IFIs and MDBs can help, but the overall financing required to develop effective cross-border transport, electricity, and digital trade is more than what the MDBs and IFIs can provide, and hence we discuss very critically the topic of crowding in private capital. The third challenge is ensuring that the costs and benefits are shared evenly among countries. Looking at the cost and benefits has been a traditional approach. However, this toolkit provides a step ahead by suggesting developing of cost and revenue sharing frameworks for lopsided projects. For example, consider a transportation corridor from a port to a landlocked country. That does require regulations that are harmonized to develop revenue sharing mechanisms. The fourth challenge is commitment and coordination. The role of national governments, regional economic communities, as well as IFIs and MDBs have been extensively covered in the toolkit. And concrete mechanisms such as developing infrastructure governance frameworks, as also advised by QII principles and which are also highlighted by other standards, are very important and very critical during project planning, project implementation. The last issue which I would like to highlight is reforms and institutions. This is a very critical issue which most cross border infrastructure projects face. Reforms are needed, but often require policy and institutional alignments. For example, there is no point in improving a road project to save a few hours of travel if the goods are going to be stuck at the border because of misaligned customs regulations. Hence, there is a need to make sure that the regulations are harmonized and policy support is provided by the national planning bodies, and that guidance is also provided in the toolkit. The audience of the toolkit is broad, as you can see, from ministries of which are involved in planning of these projects to regional economic communities as well as IFIs. It is, however, assumed that the reader is familiar with the process of developing national infrastructure projects. The focus on our toolkit is to highlight how the planning, the financing, and the institutional support and the efforts required are different and and a step ahead to make sure that the policies and the regulations are harmonized for successful planning of such projects. The toolkit also has two important annexes. The first is a short overview of the key tools, which are offered by and developed by all the three MDBs and are mentioned in the main document as emphasis on how they can be applied to a cross border context in addition to the national context. A series of case studies are also provided, which illustrate the concepts presented in the toolkit and provide a practical overview of how these projects are prepared. One aspect of the toolkit which is very important is financing instruments. The toolkit has a dedicated section on how to finance cross-border infrastructure projects sustainably, leverage the various financing instruments, and create incentives for shared interests of both the public and the private sector towards integration. Some of the private sector mobilization tools that have been mentioned have a strong emphasis on financial sustainability, financial return, and risk management. This will include type of reforms that will provide the future participation of private sector by improving the enabling environment, including transparency, the need to reduce contingent liabilities, and how to use public funds to leverage private financing, some of which is also advanced by facilities such as PPIAF within the World Bank, and that key guidance on how to de-risk projects, how to deal with currency volatility is also included as a substantial part of the guidance. Lastly, on coordination mechanisms, multi-country and regional coordination are key elements of the planning of the toolkit. Murtaza covered some of these principles, so I'm going to skip this. Let me also introduce you to a case study, which is a very significant part of the World Bank and the AFDB's initiative on Mission 300, where the World Bank is financing the development of an interconnector between Tanzania and Zambia. This is the first interconnection between the Eastern Africa Power Pool and the Southern Africa Power Pool, and it's a major step towards developing the Africa single electricity market. The project had various challenges. However, I'm going to introduce how the toolkit has been relevant for the development of the Tanzania-Zambia interconnector, or the TAZA. Initially, the TAZA was informed by the economic and technical analysis, wherein the rationale for economic and technical produced various advantages, such as reduced electricity costs, enabling cross-border trade between the members of the EAPP as well as the SAPP, and utilization of the hydropower variability, which is prevalent in the Eastern Africa power pool. This helps reduce the reliance on costly emergency power for the Southern African countries, as well as saves them 43% costs if full integration is planned. It also has significant environmental benefits, such as reduction on carbon dioxide, as well as displacement of the diesel mini grids. The project was also evaluated economically and financially, and you can see the key numbers presented here in terms of the ENPV being about at $1.7 billion. Moving from planning to the coordination and the consultation, the project was supported by the EAC and the SADC, who were in turn very influential in the development of the Eastern Africa Power Pool and the Southern Africa Power Pool. The implementation of the project was led by project implementation units within the Tanzania's electricity utility and the EAPP, which oversaw the procurement, financial reporting, and technical matters. This recommendation has also been included in the toolkit as one of the key lessons that can be learned for development of future interconnectors. Consultation with communities as well as stakeholder engagement plans were developed, and environmental and social safeguards were also standardized. As far as the financing of the project went, the financing was done in collaboration with the AFD and the European Union, and this showed how a key interconnector project does require financing from various sources, as well as the another key benefit of this is the private capital mobilization, where the project has seen generation planning for solar and wind generation projects as a result of developers being encouraged to trade electricity through the interconnector. Lastly, I would like to share that this effort through of the three MDBs under the guidance of the South African presidency has been motivating, as well as we as the three partners would like to make sure that this toolkit can live and it can be digitalized in the future, so that the toolkit can be improved over time. From the learning that we have achieved till now, it has been clear that more case studies can be offered by more countries. More tools have been developed or are under development, which can address various issues on planning, financing, and project implementation. And that is why we are together proposing and discussing steps to look at digitalization of the toolkit in the form of a learning platform, or in the form of a guidance note. Thank you so much.
Thank you once, Ishan. And I think once again, very powerful presentation, which talks to the three key elements, I think, which were mentioned earlier on: economic rationale and planning, which is piercing through. The issues of political support and governance are still coming out as key elements in terms of us moving forward with regional integration projects or cross-border infrastructure project development, financial management being also very key. But what was very striking from his presentation is the issue of the toolkit is more or less like designed to enable regional integration. because this is very cross-cutting. And also, the power example he has given on Tanzania Zambia interconnector, which was quite a difficult project, but it has seen the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think the bring in of institutional, regional institutions, I think that is also very key, because I think we cannot do this on our own. REX play a very important role. Eastern, the African Union plays a very important role, and power pools also plays a very important role. So this also called to order that as we develop cross-border infrastructure projects, even rail, roads, I think there's need for us to put up institutions, I think, which could, I think, enable us to implement these projects. So with those few remarks, again, I think I'll pause, and I think I'll make sure that at least you stay here. I'll now move on to the Ubuntu Initiative. This is taking the G20 cross-border initiative or the toolkit forward in the African way. And I think I would now invite Director Joy Kategekwa, Director for Regional Integration, to kickstart that discussion. And there will be two presentations together with Mike Salau, who is also the Director for Infrastructure. Director Joy.
Thank you very much, Lufeo. Good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to share the powerful moment in which we are today. Listening to our colleagues from the AIIB and the World Bank, I think it sets a perfect stage to ask ourselves the question, what is the power of the moment in which we are today? And in a sense, this really frames the conversations we've been having with the National Treasury of South Africa to ask ourselves, what did Africa get out of South Africa's presidency of the G20? When the world came to Africa for leadership under the G20, what did the day after look like? And so today we introduce a powerful initiative called Ubuntu, because in trying to answer that question, we went back collectively into the African spirit and asked ourselves, how do we thrive? Not just survive, but thrive. And the answer to that was really this question around, we thrive when we recognize the power in the collective. And so Ubuntu is precisely that, bringing together the power of all the African nations, creating a bridge that pulls together the strength of all African nations to work together to crack this question of cross-border infrastructure, understanding well that it's at the cracks of whether Africa can industrialize, whether Africa can trade, whether Africa can have the social services that are critical to create dignified lives on the continent. And so for us, we're really living and thriving off the power of this moment. And if you take anything away, take it that you were there when Africa crafted its response to cross-border infrastructure. Think about Ubuntu as landing the toolkit in Africa. And so this initiative is really the bridge that I spoke about, taking us from the toolkit on the one hand to effective implementation of cross-border infrastructure in Africa. In a sense, when we come back in a year, we want to have powerful stories about how things are changing because of Ubuntu. So if we go to the next slide, please. What is this initiative? Think about it as a house with 4 major pillars. And the pillars are constructed around a careful assessment of where the problem is, but also where the opportunity lies. And so Ubuntu is really tackling this question of data, tackling this question of pipelines, tackling the question of governance, and tackling the question of financing. So let's go to the next slide. You ask yourself the question, what is the issue with data? Next slide, please. The question around data is, well, you cannot plan blind. We know about Africa's infrastructure gap, anywhere from 130 billion to 170 billion. But at the time these assessments were done, it was pre-COVID, it was pre-Paris Agreement, it was pre-AFCFTA. So what exactly are we contending with today in terms of the financing gap? We need to know what that is, because when we know, we plan better. When we plan better, we execute better. And so undertaking the data, and my colleague Mike will take us through the methodology and what we're doing in that direction, is a first generation issue. The second one is pipeline generation. As DG Kennedy said, it's not the laundry list moment anymore. It's about selectivity, it's about acceleration, it's about transformation. So, what are we doing to go from the grand to that core that's truly catalytic? And again, Michael will take us through that. The third piece is the governance concilium. We know about the challenges with governance that have been talked about. We also know that there are ways and means to bring together advice, strategic and technical advice that can allow for the unlocking. And so, this great composition of a governance concilium that's truly an innovation of its time is going to help us to go further. And then finally, financing. We do all of these things. We have the pipeline, we've sorted out governance. Well, where is the money? And there again, we have some ideas about how to get innovative about that. So let me invite Michael to take us through the details. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the scene has been set by Joy. I'm just going to push a button here to the next slide. So the issue of the data. I think the two presentations we heard from Ishan and Mutaza also stress the need for data, data that is consistent, data that is really helping us to see, to have clarity about what we're talking about, but data that also help us to de-risk investment. And I think quite often we are not associating data with risk. Data give perception of risk. So the more data you have, the lower risk that our project can actually have. So therefore, the Ubuntu process is a way by which we collectively, let me say it very clearly, collectively, the National Treasury of South Africa, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, the three MDBs that are supporting the NT to put this legacy piece forward, believe that we cannot bridge the infrastructure gap without having the accurate data about the needs, data about the financing gap, data about who is financing what, and what sector are actually benefiting from the investment, and which region are able to attract more resources than others, so that we can actually see where we should focus our effort. So as you can see here on the slide, there are a few steps, about 6 of them, that will help us to get there. One is we need to reassess. This is about reassessing. We need to reassess the sector-specific model that will help us to really estimate the investment needs in each sector. My colleague Joy just mentioned that the infrastructure gap that the bank has actually worked on was dated back to 2027, where even before the COVID, right? And also before the whole Paris agreement, and also the AFCFTA. So we need to go back and reassess this, and so that we can actually take into account today's demand, today's needs, and also tomorrow's demand. The second one is to benchmark. So we need to benchmark against targets, compare investment needs against sectoral targets. The third one will be scenario framing. So what are the different scenarios that we need to work with to make sure that we are actually anticipating any future growth, and also change in situation, because this is a very dynamic process. Infrastructure demand is linked to economic growth. It's also linked to social development and social demand, and many other things, even outside of the geographical zone in which we're actually planning. It's also linked to demographic. And as you know, Africa is really, having a very dynamic demographic in the years to come. So we need to reassess by looking at all these scenarios. And the fourth one is to generate output. That means to produce estimate at various level, country level, regional, and continental. Here, we are talking about regional cross-border project. It's true. On the first thinking, we think about only regional and continental. But there are also some national projects that have regional impact. So those also should actually be integrated in this, so that by addressing some national infrastructure issue, you're also addressing the local one. Some of them, like port, for instance. Port can only be located in one geographical area, but port, as you know, can be a gateway, not only for the country where the port is located, same as airport, but also at a hinterland. So port is actually a national asset, but with regional impact. So those are some of the infrastructure that we are talking about. Incorporate integration. So again, the idea here is not just to do infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. It has to be taking a value chain approach. It has to take industrialization views, and also has to provide, a trade and also regional integration. So we need to reassess all these by looking at those kind of value chain industrialization. How do we leverage infrastructure investment to catalyze economic growth, industrialization, and create jobs, which also have been mentioned by my previous colleagues. And lastly, adapt methodology. There are few methodologies out there that are all equally good to actually assess the infrastructure need, but we need to make sure that we adapt this so that it can give us the right estimate that we're actually looking at. So this is what I mentioned. So you have on one hand here on this slide the four sectors that we are talking about, and the toolkit presented by Murtaza also covered this. Same by Ishan. That we're talking about four key infrastructure sectors: ICT, water and sanitation, transport and energy, and power. And of course, the energy example was given by Isham in his presentation. So these are the four sectors that we also have in PIDA PAP 2, which is the infrastructure framework that African Union have actually developed with the help, of course, of the African Development Bank, the REX, outer NEPAD, and also ECA. And we also have to look at the water and sanitation, because water has a multi-purpose use, sometimes also managed across multiple regions. And the idea here is to really, as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, to use the regional expansion model, so critical models, to optimize, bring out the interconnection that will help us to create the energy market. When it comes to transport, is to really establish the connectivity targets that we want to do to really, lower the logistic cost, to actually create market. It was mentioned by the DG. How do we expand the market and also make sure we link production centers to the consumption centers and provide a gateway that we need to make our economy more competitive. Water and sanitation is actually really to use this asset for expanding services and also rehabilitate assets that are there. And of course, ICT is, we believe, the enabler that will help us really to get to actually leverage efficiency in all the infrastructure sectors. Now, the process of conducting this cross-border infrastructure analysis is going to be a very inclusive one, and actually we have started already through the toolkit that establishing all these steps. So what you're seeing here is in full alignment with what we have in the toolkit. That's why this Ubuntu is going to make it like, as Joy would like to say, giving it a leg so that it can walk. Once it has been landed through the G20 process. So here you can see we will first, as I said, identify the data requirement, collect those data, and I think this is an ongoing job already. Some of you are being contacted for that. Estimate the investment needs as a result. Incorporate policy targets, because that's very important. We've signed out to SDGs, we've signed out to all kinds of things, FCFTA, and so on. And then we actually come out with a model investment scenario and apply sector-specific, as I mentioned earlier. So here it's very important to mention that all this will be time bound. We have to make sure that we actually deliver this quickly as possible, because as we always like to say, Africa cannot wait, and people are really impatient to see results. I have my colleagues from the REX here, African Union, and so on. They've been working on this regional integration and regional connectivity project for so long, and they want to see a scale up and with speed. And I think that's what Ubuntu is going to bring to the table. So I think just come back here. I think I went a bit too fast. Yes, but okay. Yes, that's it. Good. So now the second pillar, this actually will, close the first pillar description. So the second one is the one of pipeline generation. And again, I'm writing on the excellent presentation made by our DG here to talk about the importance of project preparation. And I think quite often we're trying to downplay project preparation. Many of MDBs in this room have realized this, and therefore created what we call a platform for project preparation, because it's a first step. Whether it's at the World Bank, the AIIB, the African Development Bank, and others, because we believe this is what we call it's like a market failure issue. We're trying to address market failure. Government on one hand which are the owners of the infrastructure, when they have the idea of doing infrastructure, quite often nobody wants to put money to prepare those projects because it's too risky. Yet you only need a small capital to actually unlock that. Private sector, don't even mention it. They will not go there because it's just a concept. Then nobody wants to do it, and we as MDBs find the need to come and step in and do project preparation by creating project preparation facilities. Whether it's at the World Bank, ADB, or AIB, to really play that role of unlocking and de-risk the project. That's the first de-risking that you do, to really make sure, okay, what are we talking about? How strong this is on technical basis, financial basis, environmental basis, and also, policy and governance and so on and so forth. So therefore, project preparation is actually key. So we are going to use Ubuntu to, once again, to accelerate project preparation, to de-risk project, and make sure that this first phase, which is low capital but very, very political, actually is something that we can do so that we have better prioritization of project. We only bring to the market projects that have strong economic rationale. That has been highlighted by my colleague from AIIB, that you have to look at economic rationale to determine the priority of the project. And that's what we have done with PDAPA 2. Most of you in this room were involved in that process. It went through a very rigorous project. We will actually do the same here with Ubuntu as well, using this methodology that you see here on this slide. And again, if you look at the lower side of the slide, you are seeing some of the trust fund that, at least based on the African continent, that we're seeing. And this is just a snapshot. But as I said, we also have some of them at the GIF. GIF is here from the World Bank, and we also have a good one from the AIIB, which we are actually leveraging both institutions to do co-financing on a credible pipeline to actually mobilize this funding. So this is a very important slide that I think will interest some of our stakeholders in this room. Of course, we need to filter this project. Again, I don't want to give you or bother you with all this process, but it's a very, very rigorous process that we need to go through. Again, because funding is scarce, has alternative uses. So we have to make sure that whatever we are doing is actually have a strong economic justification, and the one that will take us there to bridge the infrastructure gap that my colleague were mentioning before, which keeps increasing. As much as we see investment, financing gaps also increasing because the needs are actually very huge in the face of AFCFTA and also the other things that we have signed up for that we all collectively want to deliver. So here, we'll look at the PIDA projects. We look at the ADF, of course, this is internal terminology. We look at the REX project. We look at the projects that are interesting, all the stakeholders in this room, and make sure that the critical cross-border project that I have identified are the ones that have gone through a very rigorous process, therefore are standing chances to actually be successful projects along the line. Now, again, this is work in progress, as you can see. Here we have identified, just for the purpose of putting something on the table, look at some few projects already. As I mentioned, PIDAPAP 2 remains the framework for African Integration Minimum Program, which is about 69 projects, estimated at 160 billion capex investment, driven by African Union and Southern APAC, supported by all of us here in this room. So we're trying to map this thing out across the region, and you can see East Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa in terms of distribution, and also the size of investment. You see projects that are also higher than 1 billion, about 11 of them. This call for a major partnership to drive those projects. And of course, you look at the sector distribution there with transport, energy, water, sanitation, ICT. ICT is low, not because there's no need or the need is lower, but much because private sector has done a lot in ICT, a lot of investment in private sector, in ICT. So what we put here is what we believe that government have to step in, the backbones and so on and so forth to actually do. So this just gives you a quick, and of course, the life cycle is very important. What are these projects in terms of readiness, pipeline? Project preparation needs, project development needs, and also project financing. So this is very important to actually have in mind as we move on this pillar 2. Of course, the next one is once you do that, you have a strong prioritization process. Again, as I mentioned, very few capital out there for project preparation. is very important, but only very few resources are directed for project preparation. So therefore, it has to be utilized in a very effective way, and also by following a rigorous project. And that's again what Ubuntu want to do by really supporting projects that stand chance to reach financial close and de-risking those as a result. So the next steps here and timeline is we are going to be, continue to look at the project here. About 10, 15 of them are underway, as I mentioned. It's work in progress, and we have to make sure that we bring in all the other priority projects that some of us here in this room are actually working on, and make the Ubuntu very inclusive one, so that we can have a very strong pipeline of projects, pipeline that will help us to attract the required investment, pipeline that will help us to, tackle this issue of financing gap, and the one that also will make us achieve integration. So let me stop here. Again, Joy is going to come back. This is a very dynamic presentation. So you will see back and forth between her and myself here. Over to you, Joy.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Michael. And indeed, mine is really to take us through what do we mean when we say concilium. Next slide. I can't figure this out. Okay, so the concilium, we're really talking about best in the world advisory services that can allow for us to tackle this question of governance challenges. At the other end of the spectrum is really effective project implementation. Now we know that the challenges that manifest in project implementation for cross-border infrastructure are of a broad range: logistical challenges, procurement challenges, coordination issues, political economy issues, technical operational issues, and so on and so forth. And so we think that the governance concilium is a good way to create almost a standby, on demand facility support that can drop in, come in from time to time to fill these governance gaps and take us to the end, as I said, of enhanced project preparation, project execution. And so, in a sense, when you think about it, this governance concilium will be doing three major things: strategic advice, technical capacity, and knowledge and lessons dissemination. So the core purpose is to resolve governance bottlenecks and ensure project continuity. The objective is to facilitate project completion, execution, and strengthen institutional cooperation. And again, as I said, the functions, the core functions are essentially about advisory and unlocking challenges in implementation. So, what do we see as the strategic impact of this governance concilium? In a sense, we've looked end to end at what could come as part or as challenges, as bottlenecks, and created responsive sort of TORs of what the concilium would do. So that support prioritization of projects focused on identifying and addressing challenges to ensure timely execution. They would be at the heart of strengthening cooperation through establishing a sort of lasting coordination mechanism amongst governments, project teams that help to build capacity on this question of technical and legal issues that need to be unlocked. That also promote convergence, aligning policies and regulations across countries to create unified frameworks. And at the end of the day, we have this efficiency that we're talking about, which will create effective projects that are implemented in a cost-effective way. So, what is the structure when we say governance concilium? What does it look like? We're thinking of a panel, expert panel of highly reputable Africans with a strong track record in supporting implementation of cross-border infrastructure. This panel is interdisciplinary, i.e., their capacities in law, in finance, in engineering, in governance, the sort of bottlenecks that present themselves in implementation. And we're looking at diversity, so you have gender, you have a Pan-African look to it, and you also have a language balance. So what will it sort of look like concretely? In terms of institutional anchoring, we would anchor it jointly in terms of the AFDB group and the government of South Africa. In terms of its membership and leadership, it would have flexible working groups that are helping to do the technical sort of support that helps the advisory level to do its work efficiently. And then in terms of institutional support, would have a small sort of secretariat at the AFDB group that provides functional support in terms of coordination, but also monitoring and evaluation. And so, what does it take to constitute the concilium? This is the process that will be unfolding shortly. The first one is issuing invitations for nominations through official channels, so the call for nominations, then the submission process in terms of collecting nominations with criteria and timelines, evaluation and shortlisting, appointment of the expert members of the concilium, and then the announcement, which of course brings a lot of accountability with it. In terms of the next steps, we're in the process of preparing and reviewing the terms of reference, which will be validated jointly with the government of South Africa and the bank by November. And then we hope to have the concilium app in action by December. And so, Mike, over to you. Where is the money financing?
Yeah, what's the money? The money is out of those. Okay, so what is the money? I think that's the question. You know, we often say that the money is not the problem. The problem is to have a bankable project. That's why we put a lot of emphasis on the first two pillars, and also more importantly the third one, which really that's the glue actually to put everything together, so that we can reach pillar 4, which is innovative financing. So the money is everywhere, but they are not just, the money is not just coming to the project. So there's a problem. So how do we narrow this gap and build the bridge that Joy was talking about, which again the role that Ubuntu want to play. So here we have few ideas and few mechanism or few area that we want to actually focus on to really make sure that we address the issue of financing gap. One is to address the project preparation. So that's the bankability. Currently, we have a low bankability. We must address the bankability issue, and bankability goes through project preparation. So therefore, we have to call for strengthening of the project preparation facilities that we have in the MDBs. MDBs are really, doing their best to allocate resources for project preparation to address the issue of low bankability. But this must be capitalized to the level where we can really make a difference in pushing for project to reach bankability. So I'm calling on our partners that are here to actually make that case through the various forums that we have, and also member countries and the RECs and our political masters that are also in this room, African Union, I see here, to actually make this case for us. The second one is the issue of the risk. Risk is very important because Africa, we believe, pays a lot of premium for perception of risk. And as this has been said, all of you in this room are actually familiar with the issue of perception of risk that's really affecting Africa. But risk, we need to use, that's what the data issue is very important. We de-risk the project by making it bankable, but the data also have to speak for themselves so that we can showcase projects that are really, making it successful in Africa, to show that you can actually invest and then expect some risk-reward return that is very competitive, and commensurate with the needs and the investment in Africa. So we must address the issue of the risk by further looking at the data, making the information more transparent. And that's also why we believe that standardization can also actually help. When we talk about project preparation, when you take a project prepared by the World Bank or help prepared by the World Bank, AIIB, and the African Development Bank, you should see a similarity on those. And this should actually give confidence to investors that you have the hands of the World Bank here, the African Development Bank here, and the AIB. So that's the kind of standardization that we want to actually come out with. And that's what the toolkit is actually addressing. The toolkit is really about how do we standardize cross-border projects so that when you are processing those projects with the support of one of these MDBs, you can actually assure that 50% of your risk actually cut out immediately, because we will put that rigorous methodology there and the countries actually go by it. So this is very important. Of course, it's still true on the African continent that about 1/3 of financing to infrastructure comes from government, and that's the largest portion. We at the African Development Bank, we have a data from ICA, Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, that we produce every year that shows that where the money are coming from to finance African infrastructure. Roughly, we have about 90 billion in the last 2 years, up to from 2021 to 2023. It's a report that we're going to release very recently. It shows that African government remain the number one source of financing infrastructure in Africa. But we know also the fiscal pressures that our countries are actually facing. So it's not sustainable to count on the government alone to do this. So therefore, we must actually diversify the source of financing, and therefore we must increase the bankability, lower the risk, and standardize project preparation so that we can have other sources of financing, private sector, PPPs, asset recycling, all kinds of things like that. And then, of course, we also need to look at where I believe that the money is. This morning we heard about insurance, on the first panel, talk a lot about insurance companies have a lot of resources, but they don't know how to get to the project. So there's this kind of gap there as well. It could be lack of education to really educate, or it's also be lack of opportunities that we can actually help. And I believe that Ubuntu can help with that, because once we de-risk the project, we finance those projects, and we can repackage those projects and bring in institutional investors, because we'll have gone through a lot of risk phases, particularly the construction phase, which actually prevents institutional investors from actually taking a risk. So I think there's a lot for us to do here, and I believe that jointly we can actually achieve that. So we must bring in institutional investors, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and so on and so forth to actually play this game. And of course, the currency mismatch issues, which pertaining to PPPs, most importantly, are actually also very important, because you take, foreign currency loan to actually, support projects in a particular country where the income, the cash flow is actually local currency. So that creates those kind of, mismatch. But yes, again, MDBs, we do have instrument to actually address that. We have a lot of, currency hedging and so on, instrument that actually can help this process. But ideally, we want to deepen financial markets on the continent so that we can raise local financing to finance infrastructure in most countries. And actually, this is something that Ubuntu want to actually help to actually do. So innovative financing is what we are looking for, to bring to the table to actually support projects that have the highest risk of achieving financial close, and also high return in terms of job creation, economic and social impact, that we have been mentioning in earlier presentation. So this is a blended finance, blended instrument, that we have, but we need to really scale up the utilization of this instrument. And that can only happen if we have the right project, the right governance arrangement around those projects, and then also the right partners to actually deliver. So we need to look at the whole ecosystem here to provide that kind of innovative financing for Ubuntu through the Ubuntu Initiative. Now I think this is going to be my last slide, and I'll hand over again to Joy. So here we are just trying to demonstrate to you how we are using also some of the existing instrument. African Development Bank has the ADF 17 replenishment. I think Aisha is here. This is for the World Bank. It's the IDA replenishment, and AIIB also will have some concessional windows that support cross-border infrastructure. And we are able to have a very innovative instrument to support regional integration project in Africa. I mean, Joy's department in the bank is leading on that, to have very innovative tool whereby we create incentive for countries to work together to do cross-border projects, because the benefit may not be all across the same. But if you give that incentive, country A can work with country B, even though country B is not benefiting too much on this, because we can come to share the cost and then to maximize the benefit for each one of them. I mentioned blended finance earlier on, capital market instrument, institutional mechanism or investors, and also partnership and so on to actually come. So this is where we are. Ubuntu is to provide the critical innovative financing instrument, risk guarantee, technical assistance, viability gap funding, and so on, to actually crowd in private sector investment to support our cross-border project. So Joy, this is, I think, the last slide here before you come in. It's really about, on one hand, we have the problem, the solution, which is the Ubuntu initiative, and then also the impact that we're actually looking at, which is to increase capital investment into our infrastructure, and therefore also de-risk our project and bring in private sector. So let me leave you again with Joy,
Yes.
who is now going to make us through, take us through the next steps.
Closing off,
Yes.
the next steps, where do we go from here? And I think that I hope you're as excited as we are, that something has shifted on the continent of Africa, that it is great the presidency came to Africa, and that something is going to stay concretely in terms of work that will allow us to fill that crucial gap of cross-border infrastructure. Ubuntu has continental ownership. We've undertaken heavy consultations across the continent, and it has the support of the continent. Here we are today at the global unveiling, the global launch of Ubuntu. Now we are moving ahead instead to operationalize these four pillars. Mike has taken us through the steps that are ongoing, but really it's an invitation for partnership. It's an invitation to join us so that we can do this together. We shall continue to mobilize financing and ensure that Ubuntu indeed shows that footprint of the closed gap, so to speak. And so my final message, our final message really is that Ubuntu is operational, but it will get even more if you join us. Ubuntu is not aspirational. We are already on the road. So please join us so that we can transform this continent and build the Africa that we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again for that presentation. And I think what you can see very clearly is from the first presentation. We saw clearly the reflection over the best practices. And I think these best practices permeates through the toolkit which was presented. And I think they're clear. And I think this brings us also, how do we give effect to this toolkit which has been developed by the G20 so that we can give it legs? So that's where we stand here. And I think we are excited, and we believe strongly that I think we can do much more, I think, as we implement these things, I think, which we have discussed. Primarily, it's the issue of best practices, G20 toolkit being in place, as well as ensuring that at least the legs are there, and I think let's move forward. And I think the call to action, which entails that I think collaboration is very vital. And I think if we did that, I think we'll be moving in the right direction. And at this juncture, allow me to just call for some reflection. And I think here I'll open up to the audience. If there is anyone here who has got some reflection over the Ubuntu initiative, which has been discussed, please raise your hand. And I think maybe you could also provide any statement. If it's a statement of support, I think that would be really welcome. So allow me. Yes, there. Your reflection, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. So Marie Döhn, I'm representing the German Ministry of Finance. So thank you very much for presenting the Ubuntu initiative to us today. Yeah, congratulations from us. Ubuntu, as I learned, stands for a collective and partnership approach to solving difficult challenges. And as you presented Ubuntu initiative today, it really promises to be a game changer for solving difficult challenges related to cross-border infrastructure projects in Africa, and which are the foundation for regional cooperation, economic integration, and for creating employment and sustainable development. So I agree that partnership must be at the heart of realizing cross-border infrastructure projects, and multi-country ownership will be essential for the success of the initiative, I think. Platforms can be a useful instrument to bring different actors together to effectively steer and coordinate donors along their respective comparative advantages. And Ubuntu, I think, can be such a platform and like a pilot for the toolbox that the IWG developed to bring the toolbox into action for Africa. And the Ubuntu initiative aligns well with the compact with Africa, which Germany continues to support and advance together with South Africa's co-chairs of the Africa Advisory Group, and which promotes private sector-led growth by improving investment environment for private sector investment, employment, growth, and sustainable development. And there are other initiatives Germany supports where we think there are synergies with the Ubuntu initiative, like the PIDA you mentioned, which focus on cross-border projects, and the G7 PGII, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, where Germany with other G7 partners and the EU support cross-border economic corridors like the Lobito corridor in Central Africa, for example. And of course, also it aligns well with the MDB's agenda to support regional and global public goods, where the focus is on projects that have positive external externalities, were cross-border, like concerning the environment, climate, health, peace, and security. And yeah, so I think Ubuntu really reflects what characterizes our era, is that we can only prosper if we work together across borders, and we can only address the regional and global challenges we face nowadays by working together. So again, congratulations, and we welcome very much that's an Africa owned and Africa led initiative, but we're happy to support where we can. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other reflections? Yes. The mic. Yeah.
Merci. Je vais parler en français. Mon anglais étant très excellent.
Sorry, just before you move on, I think there are mics at the back, those who cannot speak French. I think, yes. Sorry for that.
Alors, je suis le commissaire de l'UMOA chargé de l'aménagement du territoire et des transports. Je conduis la délégation de l'UMOA à cette session. Et je rappelle que l'UMOA, c'est l'Union économique et monétaire ouest-africaine qui est basée à Ouagadougou, au Burkina Faso. Je voudrais remercier les organisateurs de cette réunion, la Banque africaine de développement en particulier, qui nous a invités à prendre part à cette session en tant qu'invités. La délégation que je conduis comprend moi-même le commissaire, et moi je suis un politique, il faut le dire, et je suis accompagné du directeur des transports de l'UMOA qui est là. Et je voudrais donc, au nom de la commission de l'UMOA, remercier une fois encore les organisateurs pour nous avoir associés à cet événement. Alors, ce que je puis dire d'emblée, c'est de dire, le temps nous manque, hein, j'ai compris qu'il faut aller très vite, pour vous dire que l'UMOA, tel que nous travaillons, tel que nous projetons nos actions, nous sommes déjà dans Ubuntu. Tous nos projets sont vraiment Ubuntu. C'est-à-dire que dans la conception des projets que nous exécutons, nous considérons déjà l'aspect transfrontalier, qui est d'ailleurs l'essence de notre existence. Il faut qu'on puisse travailler au-delà des États et pour que nous puissions faire ce que les États individuellement ne peuvent pas faire. Et donc, l'ensemble des projets que nous exécutons, nous le faisons dans le cadre donc, de la gestion communautaire de notre espace. À ce titre, je voudrais indiquer, remercier la Banque africaine de développement d'ailleurs pour ça, dire que depuis environ 1 an, nous avons un schéma de développement de notre espace qui comprend l'ensemble des projets transfrontaliers dans tous les domaines, hein. Le ferroviaire, les projets routiers, les projets énergétiques, les projets numériques, les projets de développement du capital humain à l'échelle régionale. Cette présentation de ces projets a été faite à Rabat l'année dernière, la Banque africaine de développement. Et nous sommes à la phase de l'organisation de la table ronde des bailleurs de fonds. Donc, je profite de cette session pour lancer un appel pour dire que nous allons inviter tous les acteurs concernés, probablement en 2026, pour la tenue de cette table ronde. Alors, je note également que la gouvernance du dispositif qui a été décrit dépend beaucoup de l'implication des États et également de la coopération entre les États. Alors, au niveau de l'UMOA, nous sommes un peu à un stade où les États, pour tout ce qui concerne le transfrontalier, ont juridiquement délégué leurs compétences à l'UMOA. Donc, c'est tout à fait normal que dans le cadre des infrastructures, qu'il y ait des accords ou qu'il y ait des actions qui permettent d'avoir de la même réglementation, les mêmes normes en matière de construction de routes, en matière de standards, de normes de ferroviaire et tout ça. Mais dans l'UMOA, nous sommes déjà à ce stade. Alors, ce que je voudrais aussi dire, c'est que nous avons deux expériences que je souhaite rapidement explorer. C'est de dire que nous construisons dans l'UMOA actuellement ce que nous appelons les postes de contrôle juste à poser, que tout le monde connaît. Mais c'est un portefeuille large qui couvre l'ensemble des frontières entre les États de l'UMOA pour faciliter les échanges entre les États. Au-delà de la construction des routes, il faut, aux frontières des États, faciliter les formalités d'entrée et de sortie. Et nous sommes en train de construire donc ces postes de contrôle juste à poser qui peuvent servir d'exemple pour d'autres régions de l'Afrique. Et enfin, je voudrais indiquer une expérience de l'UMOA qui peut être partagée avec l'ensemble des CER ou des États qui sont présents. C'est ce que nous appelons les SATI. C'est un sigle français, francophone, je veux dire. SATI, c'est Schéma d'aménagement transfrontalier intégré. Ça concerne les infrastructures socio-économiques et l'approche, c'est de faire gérer ces infrastructures par les pouvoirs locaux des frontières des États. Donc, les États centraux délèguent leur pouvoir aux autorités locales qui travaillent dans un cadre qui ne tient pas compte des frontières. Et lorsque ces autorités, avec les populations, valident les programmes qui sont proposés, ces programmes sont financés et c'est l'UMOA qui couvre et qui gère ces projets-là. Je voudrais donc souligner que nous sommes prêts à travailler avec la BAD, avec la Banque mondiale. Je remercie sincèrement la BAD pour le financement de plusieurs projets et je ne vais pas les citer, sinon je risque d'oublier certains. Également la Banque mondiale pour le financement du projet WACA, qui est un projet par essence transfrontalier, puisqu'il couvre au moins 7 pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest et 1 ou 2 pays de l'Afrique centrale. Merci et merci.
There is a hand. Okay, one and yes. Keep it a bit short because of time. We've got one or two issues we'd like to present. Yeah.
So who goes first? Thank you, Dr. Banda. My name is Ed Van Moyo. I'm from the SADC Secretariat. And SADC is comprised of 16 member states, with 4 of them being oceanic member states. I would like to state that over the years, as a region, we've developed several strategies and master plans to advocate for cross-border infrastructure projects, such as the Regional Infrastructure Development Master Plan, which was developed in 2012 up to 2027, covering energy, ICT, transport, and the water sector. We also have the SAPO plan of 2017, which is a guiding document for the development of generation and transmission interconnectors in the region. And recently we did develop what we call the gas infrastructure investment blueprint for the SADC region, covering gas pipelines and gas to power projects. And we're currently developing the railway master plan, also to drive cross-border railway infrastructure. And we're piloting the north-south corridor to transform it into an economic corridor And we are currently developing what we call an investment blueprint for the corridor as well. But I must state here that our principles have been very clear to us that what we need to do is go into the implementation phase, enough of strategies, enough of master plans. We want to see implementation of these cross-border projects. So we therefore welcome this initiative, and in particular the pillar on championing innovative financing, as it resonates well with the ambitions of the SADC region, as it intends to demonstrate how it can systematically de-risk projects to attract private capital. In our view, this will supplement the efforts of the region that we've been undertaking to develop these projects. And this has been the missing link. In particular, to look at the extent of how we've been developing feasibility studies. We complete one today, then we update the study again tomorrow. We need to come out of that cyclic nature of doing things and go into implementation. Lastly, I just wanted to indicate that we are interested in knowing how to access a toolkit which has been developed, and if there are any rights that have to be issued to us in order for us to just navigate through that toolkit and just understand how it works. So we therefore fully support the Ubuntu initiative and look forward for its full implementation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I will invite one, that is African Union.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamugisha Kazaura, and I am the Director of Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission. Allow me first to commend the South Africa G20 presidency, as well as the African Development Bank for this Ubuntu approach for regional infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure development within the continent. Also, as well, commend the AIB and the World Bank, together the South African G20 presidency and the African Development Bank for the toolkit. These initiatives are very much welcome, and I'll be speaking, joining my colleagues from UMEWA as well as SADC, speaking from the perspective of the regional and continental bodies and how useful or valuable we consider these tools are going to be. At the African Union Commission, we have a number of continental priorities, and some of them have been highlighted in the presentations which have been made. One of them being the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA. And the second phase of this PIDA, Priority Action Plan 2, started from 2021 up to 2030, and as Mike explained, requires about $160 billion for implementation. But we also have other continental initiatives on energy, like the Africa Single Electricity Market. I think that was touched upon by the presentation which was made by the colleague from the World Bank, when he was giving an example of the interconnector between Tanzania and Zambia. Actually, that interconnector starts from Kenya, connects to Tanzania, then goes to Zambia and connects the two power pools of the Eastern African and Southern African power pools. So that's part of the Africa Single Electricity Market, which wants to create one of the largest electricity market in the world, bringing together 55 countries of the African Union. And we anticipate or expect that it will be operational by 2040. It's very ambitious. And it has a component, what we call the Continental Power System Master Plan, which seeks to add an additional 1,200 gigawatts of electricity by 2040, with an investment projection of about $1.3 trillion. That, coupled with the M300, I think this was also mentioned in the presentations which were being made, which aims to accelerate energy access to 300 million citizens of the continent by 2030. You can see the work which is ahead of us, and in particular from us at the continental level and our regional economic communities, which we work very close with our member state to see these great continental ambitions achieved. This brings me to the point that we believe that the Ubuntu approach and the toolkit are very timely. We anticipate they'll bring new impetus to accelerate the implementation of cross-border and regional infrastructure projects. At this juncture, having the experience of working at the regional economic community, the East African community, I can tell we have come a long way. I do recall in East Africa, the first cross-border regional project which was implemented was a road. It could be simple now if you cross that road, which was connecting Tanzania and Kenya, about 300 kilometers from Arusha to Nairobi. There was a lot of work which needed to be done because you have to harmonize the road specification and standards, the geometric design, the road width on one side was different from the other side, etc., etc. So it looks very easy once you have the road there and you're traveling across it, but it was not easy. And that road was completed in 2005. So the experience which has been gained over the last 20 years, I can tell when I'm looking at the Ubuntu for regional infrastructure projects and the toolkit has taken on board all this work. The same experience is now being replicated in implementation of cross-border electricity transmission links. I think we have a lot of them now which are ongoing in the continent. It's same experience now which is replicated in implementing the cross-border railway infrastructure. I heard the representative from BMZ mentioning about the Lobito corridor. We have a number of railway infrastructure projects connecting more than one country, two countries, three countries. So I look at this toolkit and I look at the Ubuntu approach and I can tell that it's built on practical experience which has been learned over the years in implementation of regional infrastructure projects within the continent. This approach, Ubuntu and the toolkit, could not have been more timely. As we stand here, we're currently doing the midterm review of the PDAPAP2 project, which started in 2020 up to 2030. So we're halfway in between. We need to see how we can further accelerate the implementation of the PDAPAP2. In the presentation which was made by Mike, he mentioned that the required capital expenditure is about 160 billion. How far have we gone into the 160 billion? How many of the 69 projects have progressed from whatever project status or cycle they were in to the next? So we're going to do a review. And it's very timely for us that this approach and the toolkit have been developed and have been launched today. And we anticipate or expect we'll adopt these toolkits to help us in the implementation or in the review and make sure that we integrate them in the implementation of this cross-border infrastructure project. I will speak from the African Union Commission point of view, but I'm sure I'll be talking on behalf of the REX here, that we strongly support the Ubuntu approach for regional or cross-border infrastructure project implementation, and we'll adopt them in our planning and implementation of these projects. So again, I thank the South Africa G20 presidency, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, AIB, for these initiatives. And we are available and we affirm our commitment that we're ready to work with you in making sure that this initiative achieve its expected objectives and results. Thank you very much.
Let's be a little bit more concise,
Yes,
so at least we can, yeah.
Well, for sure. Dear colleagues, thank you for great presentations. Well, such approaches and such great initiatives should be supported by the practical activities for sure. And so therefore, there Russian Federation introduces the new financial instrument for investing in projects in Africa. And as our infrastructure initiative for the countries of the continent. And this facility will provide their soft landing being used to finance the most important projects in the continent. So this new mechanism is based on the principles of just collaboration and mutual benefits, and it also can contribute to the practical implementation of such initiatives as Africa 50 and PIDA mentioned today. So, and we hope that such activities will ensure the effective division of labor and practical fulfillment of such approaches as Ubuntu. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll stop here because we have already run out of time. And I would like to invite Director Joy Kategekwa so that she can introduce someone special.
Yes, thank you very much, Lufeo, and I think I'll just stay here. So we've talked a lot about Ubuntu, and I imagine you're imagining. And so we have to offer today a spectacular performance by one of the world's greatest spoken word artists. She is going to help us to envision an Africa where Ubuntu has succeeded. It is my pleasure to introduce Miss Sipokazi Jonas, a Capetonian from here in Cape Town, and who's going to take us through an imagination of Ubuntu. Sipo, over to you.
The wound of Africa is deep, wide as the horizon, and it bleeds all over our Genesis. Bleeds from the mouths of history books. Bleeds from the split tongues of media screens speaking in stereotypes, then hiding the blade between pages and scenes. Bleeds from Western museums where antiquities are held captive. Bleeds in laboratories where bodies are stripped of their dignity, then turned into artifact for display. The bleeding wound divides us with borders. How can we see ourselves as we truly are when our vision is distorted by the sight? In the words and wisdom of Rumi, the wound is where the light enters you. Here at the intersection of bleeding and light, this wound becomes an invitation. Africa seeks to heal itself through its children. We are done. We are done with dreaming. We are done with dreaming and outdated stereotypes. We have been shaping our own story, one of a continent moving and growing. We rise as thunderous smoke. The voice of Mosi Owatunya floods towards the banks. And our ambition foams and dissolves rock. It quenches the air and nourishes everything that it touches. We wish for an Africa that is a body protected from self-inflicted wounding and the colonizing gaze. We want to fashion new robes for ourselves, imagining each country as fabric, 54 exquisite pieces, a kaleidoscope of histories from north to south, east to west and central Africa, manifesting ourselves in print, here and all over the diaspora. We will archive who we are into every fiber, then style ourselves into everything that we can be. We are ready to make this continent as it makes us. But how to quilt all of these textures? Diverse peoples and cultures and over 3,000 languages, often frayed by division and incessant politics. How to sew together what seems unreconcilable, when unity does not ask us to be the same, only connected. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is both needle and thread, piercing while it mends, forging new pathways of connection between borders. Ubuntu is more than a cliche. Borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor, a glass of water to a thirsty stranger, or a village adopting an orphaned child. Ubuntu is also gritty and worthy and willing to get its hands dirty. It will chastise and guide a child who troubles the community. Ubuntu is broad-shouldered, helping a widow to bear the weight of grief. Ubuntu asks each person to participate, that all may benefit from shared effort. Umtu, ngumtu, kabantu. Motu ke motu, kabantu. When my humanity is a mirror for yours, then we are challenged to reflect the best of our personhood, to be the Africa we want to build. Connecting and creating collective identities, healing and building a communion of economy, cultivating collaboration and imagination, pipelines of ideas and services and creativity, from hut to skyscraper, from glass to clay. We manifest ourselves in print. We manifest ourselves in print. People and technology, moving goods by road and air, by railway, from valley to highway, across regions and from country to country. Manufacturing our own solutions as one Africa. Celebrating all the complexity of who we are, draped in fabulous robes, stitched together by Ubuntu betu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't know if you hear me, Sipo Kazi, Jonas. Wow. Thank you so much for taking us to that place called Ubuntu. Thank you for charting the way, for lifting our spirits. It's a good note to end this conversation. Thank you very much.
I will not say much, or I can say it was uplifting, and I could see a lot of connections through this poem. I could see the pipeline of projects. I could see innovation of financing within this. I can't believe it. I'm becoming a poet. You know, that's how great it was. And I think with those few words, I would like to invite Boy Tumelo to give us his closing remarks.
Good afternoon, colleagues, distinguished guests, IWG members, and invited countries. To those that I have not met, my name is Buitumelo Mashilo, and I lead the G20 IWG under South Africa's presidency. And today has been nothing short of spectacular. It is quite a fulfilling day for the first day of the IWG meeting as part of the fourth and final IWG under our presidency. And I hope that today has been as useful, as insightful as it has been for us. It really has been quite good from our perspective. And I just want to thank a few people that have made today a success. Firstly, to our partners, specifically the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the Council of Europe Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, who have really helped us to arrange and present the seminars today. To our financial sponsors, firstly, the DBSA 91, as well as Investec, thank you very much. Let me also take a moment to thank our speakers and our moderators for their insightful and interesting discussions today. This morning, we started the day with social infrastructure. And one of the things that was said was that accessible health and housing are fundamental for a thriving society. And these should be discussed more, including in the IWG itself. So for us as South Africa, we will continue promoting the importance of social infrastructure as a strategic investment priority. Thereafter, we heard presentations about blended finance, a relatively new topic in South Africa, which is quite important for closing the financing gap. And I think even more important was the fact that we delivered on something that has been a gap in the past, and that is we heard the voice of the private sector. Far too often, we speak as governments, we are able to articulate what our positions are, what our investment plans are, and so on and so forth. And we say that the financing gap keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So today, we were able to bring in governments, we were able to bring in the private sector, we were able to bring in the DFIs, MDBs, and so on and so forth. And that has been quite insightful. And lastly, we ended on a very high note, the Ubuntu Initiative. And this is what we want our G20 presidency to be: an African vehicle that delivers tangible outcomes to support Africa's development through transformative infrastructure projects. For far too long, we've been producing reports, we've been producing research, we've been doing a lot of analysis. The time for action is now. So we are really, really excited with the new partnerships that have been formed here that will help in taking a lot of the discussions that we've had in the past forward. And lastly, I want to really underscore the importance of data. It's one of the points that have been raised across all three seminars today, to say we need high quality, consistent data. Again, those of you who know our priorities in the IWG, it is that we have set infrastructure data is important from an investment perspective, from a financing perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and many other different perspectives. So we have seen that come up over and over again. And lastly, I just want to take this opportunity to really thank the delegates that are here today, to thank the invited guests. And I was told to make a very, what shall I call it, a very important announcement, which is around the dinner, which we are going to have. We, as the South African presidency, are honored to invite you to Steenbeck Wine Farm, which I am told is just next door. I don't know where it is, but I have been told that it is just around the corner. Delegates are requested to please collect a wristband just outside the seminar room, and there will be transport waiting for us in front. So please just make sure that you collect your wristband, and we will go to the cars in order to drive to the Steenbeck wine farm. And I'm also told that we've got ushers that will help us go to, well, get to the transport services that have been addressed. Sorry, that have been arranged. Thank you, everyone. Today has really been good. We look forward to having the formal IWG discussions today. Thank you very much.